Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, Chancellor, thank you for the City of Los Angeles and UCLA for hosting our announcement today. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your important efforts to combat climate change. I also want to say a special word of thanks to Mayor Newsom for being here, and London's Mayor Ken Livingston and Deputy Mayor Nick Gavran. Thank you for being here and for the leadership that London has taken in creating this large cities climate group, and for the efforts you're making for London to become a model for energy conservation and greenhouse gas reduction. Finally, I want to thank Prime Minister Blair for taking time from a very busy schedule to show up to support us today, and you'll hear from him later. But I want to say how much his leadership on this issue means to me personally, because the UK has disproved the canard that led the United States Senate to vote against the Kyoto Climate Change Treaty even before I could present it to them. And then, of course, after Al Gore and I left, the Bush administration announced that they would renounce the treaty, all because of the idea that is rampant in the old energy economy, that it was impossible for a country to get rich, stay rich, and get richer without putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Great Britain's target under Kyoto was more rigorous than ours. It was a 12% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels. Already we know that the United Kingdom will beat their target by at least 50%. And so let's look at the argument of those who have attacked those of us who want to do something about this. How terrible it would be for the economy. The British economy of all the European ones is the most like America's, the most open, the most flexible. Their unemployment rate is about the same as ours. We have just finished the first 5 years in our history where we've had increasing productivity in the workforce, and average wages have remained flat, poverty has increased. Average wages have gone up in Great Britain, poverty has declined, and inequality has decreased. Now, because of my politics, I'd like to tell you it's because his tax and social policies are more like mine than the current American administration. But the truth is, that may have something to do with it, but the truth is, the main reason is that unlike the United States, the United Kingdom has found a source of new jobs in an open global economy in the first decade of the 21st century, in a commitment to a clean, independent energy future. So thank you, Prime Minister, for setting an example that all Americans should be willing to follow. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. We all know now that climate change is occurring more rapidly than previously we had thought. We see it in the meltings occurring everywhere, in our own snow-capped mountains, in the Tibetan glacier, in the Greenland ice cap, which contains 8 or 10% of all the fresh water on Earth. And if it continues to melt at the present rate, sometime in the next 40 years or so, we'll lose 50 feet of Manhattan Island, America's most expensive real estate currently. I'm in Harlem in the middle of the island. I'll be all right. But it's not a hopeful sign. More importantly, and very troubling for the United Kingdom and all of Northern Europe, if we lose that much fresh water into the ocean, it will almost certainly interrupt the flow of the Gulf Stream, which moderates temperatures in Northern Europe in the winter, so we could have this perverse development of making Northern Europe uninhabitably cold in the winter while the rest of the world continues to burn to a crisp. We continue to lose topsoil, we continue to lose water supplies, we continue to lose biodiversity at a breathtaking rate. Hillary and her odd couple colleague, Senator John McCain, have gone, taking recalcitrant members of the Senate, have gone to Point Barrow, Alaska, near the Arctic Circle, to see the manifestations in the northernmost part of America of climate change, and have gone to the Norwegian islands 600 miles north of the European continent, to the northernmost village on Earth, to see firsthand how rapidly these changes are occurring. We have to reduce about 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions over the next 10 to 15 years. It sounds like a daunting task, but I don't believe it is. I don't believe it is for two reasons. First of all, we now have a majority of the people in every major greenhouse gas emitting country on Earth who believe this is a problem. And secondly, at least in the more mature economies, we have overcome the most crippling problem, which is the false idea that we couldn't deal with this without hurting the economy. And thirdly, we have the technology available. So the main thing we have to do is to organize ourselves to move as quickly as possible, and in the process to demonstrate to the developing countries, where there is still more doubt about whether they can become rich without continuing to put more greenhouse gas emissions into the air. We have to organize ourselves quickly enough to demonstrate that this is good for the economy. And if you're an American or European, indeed if you're a peace-loving person anywhere on Earth, this is also quite good for national security, because too many of the sources of greenhouse gases come from countries that are politically unstable, and the wealth transfers are staggering. A lot of the work we do in Africa, for example, is threatened by the impact of the rising oil prices on the African continent, which basically, in some countries, totally wipe out the impact of increased aid being given. So this is a very, very serious problem, but also a phenomenal opportunity, and we should see it as such. Today we are here to announce a partnership between the Alliance of Large Global Cities and my foundation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Cities are responsible for over 75% of the emissions. Large ones, obviously, are not only the largest source of greenhouse gases, but also today the most visible in their leadership, which can set a model for others to follow. We know what needs to be done. We have to use less energy and find cleaner sources. But as I said, the good news is we don't have to have major breakthroughs. Oh, they would help all right. But existing technologies are enough to make dramatic reductions. Today, cities waste a lot of energy. Most of our buildings waste more energy than they use because their heating, cooling, and ventilation systems are inefficient, because of poor construction of walls, roofs, and windows, because light bulbs use only 5% of the energy needed to run them to produce the light. The rest is wasted. Cars idle in traffic jams. You know nothing about that here. City vehicle fleets like buses, garbage trucks, police and fire vehicles run inefficiently on fuels that generate too much CO2. Street lighting and traffic lighting use technologies that waste energy. Water systems use huge amounts of energy, and waste disposal systems generate large amounts of poisonous methane in the atmosphere, which is even more potent in the emission of greenhouse gas emissions than carbon dioxide. Energy wasted in inefficient power distribution systems fed by distant coal-fired power plants are the biggest source of greenhouse gases in the world, and China is bringing on a new coal-fired plant about once a week. In the United States, it's important to point out that these coal-fired plants operate at only about 35% efficiency, which means that 2/3 of all the greenhouse gases emitted by our coal-fired power plants do not provide any beneficial electricity to us. Existing technology would enable those plants to have their efficiency increased from 35 to about 57%. New plants can be built at 60 or better, those changes alone would have a dramatic impact on greenhouse gas emissions. As I said, this is important to me not only because of climate change, but for national security reasons, and because, as the United Kingdom has shown, it's actually the only viable economic strategy for wealthy countries who want to maintain open economies, trade, help to develop poor countries around the world, and still generate new jobs with rising incomes. So here's what we're going to do with this partnership. First, we will organize a purchasing consortium to pool the purchasing powers in large cities, to lower prices of energy-saving products, and to accelerate the development of new technologies to be used in cities to reduce consumption and create cleaner energy. And we will open the benefits of this purchasing consortium to other smaller cities around the world. This is exactly what we did with the AIDS drugs. We basically convinced the generic producers of AIDS drugs to go from a high-margin, low-volume, uncertain payment strategy to a low-margin, high-volume, quick payment strategy, and we dramatically reduced the prices. Now we work in 25 countries with our AIDS project, but we sell those medicines in nearly 60 to about 400,000 people, about 25% of the people in the whole world that are getting the medicine today in developing countries. So we know this will work, and it's imperative that we take advantage of it. And the scale of buying we can do because of the consortium of big cities and because they're well distributed on every continent of the world will be truly impressive. Secondly, we will deploy the best experts in the world to assist in developing and implementing plans that best chart the progress of the initiatives undertaken, and then to share all the information. Now, this is real important. For those of you that are active in this, you know that one of the most controversial parts of the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions once you start is setting a realistic baseline and accurately measuring reductions. You know, for example, for people like me who've always believed that the carbon sinks are important, there's a lot of controversy because some people claim they have reduced greenhouse gas emissions through no-till farming, but they're counting acres that were under no-till before they began to do it. And so there's a lot of these kind of issues. It's really important that this effort maintain its integrity. So we have to have a clearly understood baseline and clearly understood standards for measuring, and people have to buy it. Because I personally believe that we can't do all that we need to do without using some sinks. We have to have some serious reforestation efforts, just for no other reason than to restore the quality of soil and biodiversity and maintain water supplies throughout the world. But we can't afford to have anybody think that any of us are trying to game the system here. None of us have an interest in cheating. The only thing we really need to do is to figure out how best to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions to avoid calamity. So this is important. The next point I want to make is that we in the cities are not doing this alone. When my foundation was asked to work with the cities, we partnered with several other people, the way we do with our AIDS work. And because we knew we needed all the help we could get, and there's more work to be done than all of us can do together. So I want to acknowledge the groups that have already agreed to partner with us. The International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, the U.S. and the Global Green Building Councils, the Climate Group, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, the Earth Day Network, the Alliance to Save Energy, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. We'll also have other partners as we get to work, working with the large city mayors and large businesses based in those cities to mobilize resources and to make these things happen. And we'll have to mobilize some more financial resources as we go along. I am encouraged at the broad base of Americans and people around the world, apparently from disparate sources, who get this now. And let me say that I think that the political base for acting here and the financial base will only broaden in the years ahead if for no other reason that an increasing number of petroleum geologists tell us we've reached peak production on oil, which means people who never before were concerned about climate change realize we have to use less oil anyway, because if we keep using it at pleasant rates and the conservative geologists are right and we run out in 35 years, or 50 years, that's not enough time to convert the earth off of oil to some other fuel base. So I think that this is going to happen. But when I agreed to work with the cities, we said that we wanted to raise our own money to pay our own costs because we wanted the cities to spend their money helping their own citizens. And guess who our first big contributors were? This is a harbinger of the future. This is good. Our first contributors were Barbara Streisand and Rupert Murdoch. And I bet you, and to be perfectly honest, this may be the first time I've ever said that because I didn't want to risk either one of them having second thoughts. And I'd also like to thank Anson Beard from New York. Those three people got us started on this. But Barbara has been funding climate change solutions since the late 1980s, and Rupert Murdoch has committed News Corp to reducing its own emissions of greenhouse gases and to become a carbon neutral company. Maybe he thinks it's a country. But we were having a good laugh about this, but this is serious business. You just think about it. There should be no political, there should be no philosophical, there should be no difference here. There should be no national difference here. I remember when I went to China late in my second term and we did an environmental event dealing with climate change and species preservation. The environmental minister of China came up practically with tears in his eyes to thank me because he said he was the only person in his government who believed then that you could reduce greenhouse gas emissions without hurting China's longed-for economic expansion. I'll never forget that. And now the Chinese have tougher auto emission standards than we do. They get this. So I say that not only because I am grateful to Barbara Streisand and Rupert Murdoch, Anson Beard, but because we all need those kind of alliances. We cannot afford any enemies on this. Time is our enemy. Our past habits are our enemies. The entrenched thought patterns and economic interests of yesterday are our common adversaries. So we all need to join hands, and we need to say that they have set a good example for us. And I'm very grateful to them. So that's what we're going to do. I believe whether I'm working on childhood obesity or AIDS or any of the other problems we work on, I think what the world lacks so often are systems that work, that prove that there is a reward for effort. This is, for those of us in wealthy countries, a bird's nest on the ground. And for the developing countries, we have to show them that they can get rich quicker and have more control over their future if they follow this path. One final story. I was with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia the other day. And they're one of our AIDS partners, but he's a highly intelligent man. And he said, you know, I think Africa should become the first oil-free continent in transportation. He said, we can grow sugarcane as well as Brazil. He then went through all the conversion ratios of the different base fuels for biofuels. And he said, just think, if we ran all of our cars in the whole continent on biofuels, we would double farm income, create a great constituency for stopping soil erosion, promote people in reforestation efforts because we were going to have sustainable farming, and we'd sell all our oil on the international markets, diluting the influence of all those unstable countries. Here's a guy sitting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in a country with a per capita income of $2 a day, after decades of all kinds of trouble, thinking in that way. That's very hopeful for the future because we all have to do this together. And we have seen the results, not only in what the United Kingdom has done, but we know that Portland, Oregon has reduced their emissions below America's greenhouse gas, the Kyoto target, and their economy is booming. We know that DuPont Chemical has reduced their greenhouse gas emissions and saved hundreds of millions. They may be up to $1 billion a year now they're saving because of this. We know that this is a good thing to do, and we all have to join hands.